Everybody, welcome back to Change Your Perspective, Change Your Awareness, Change Your Life. I am Dr. Michelina AF, hashtag that felon doctor, here to continue talking about duality, polarity, how things counter each other in nature. Today, I want to talk about helpfulness and harmfulness. And I think this is super important. Specifically for me, it is super important. This has been something that when I was in the throes of despondency and despair, I really had to work through. So hopefully this will be something that is illuminating to you, helpful to you, and insightful for you. So when you're thinking about help and harm, there's a lot of things that sometimes can be looked at as helpful when they're really harmful, and or you think it's harmful when it's actually helpful. As an example, saying yes when you want to say no is not helpful. That's harmful. Okay, that's harmful because now you're going to show up in resentment. So when you say yes and you want to say no, it doesn't help the situation out. And this is really tricky because your intention is to be helpful, but also what you're doing is people pleasing. I learned this the hard way, right? When I didn't really want to send nude pictures, but the kid asked me for them and I sent them, right? Because I didn't want to say no, so I said yes because I was so uncomfortable with my no. Saying no is a helpful thing because it helps you to enforce boundaries. It helps you to say, hey, I'm okay with this. Hey, I'm not okay with this. When I was teaching, there was a course that I taught called Heroes, Villains, and Monsters. And what really sets that apart is the intention. You're intentionally trying to help is the hero. You're intentionally trying to harm is the villain. And the monster is the gray space where they don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're being helpful, maybe they're being harmful. Most of us in the unconscious realms of our mind live in the monster zone. We are all little monsters unintentionally because we live out of our subconscious. 95%, this is science, this isn't Michelina, 95% of what we experience in our reality comes from our subconscious. Our conscious mind controls 5%. Now, admittedly, how do you access your subconscious? Well, there's only really two ways. The first is from 0 to 7, when your brain is in theta state, you're naturally functioning out of your subconscious. Everything is bypassing your conscious mind, going into your subconscious. So everybody who's got any problems ever has to investigate 0 to 7, has to investigate their childhood, right? That's the science of it. That just is what it is. The other way to get to the subconscious, because it's only accessible really through theta state, so you either have to take advantage of when your brain is in theta as an adult, which is 2 times, the liminal space before bed and the liminal space before you wake up. That's when you're in theta state. Or you repeat it in your conscious mind enough that it goes from your conscious mind to your subconscious. Those are the only ways to access your subconscious, okay? So this is why you hear people talk about affirmations, reprogramming, blah, blah, blah. If you've heard about any of that, that's what they're talking about. That's where it comes to. So what does this have to do with being helpful and harmful? Well, a lot of us as adults are functioning out of this harmful place in our subconscious that we don't realize because we've been wounded and we've been hurt and we've been traumatized and all these things. And so we don't examine our intention nearly enough. We don't examine how a thing is helpful or harmful to someone else, right? And so I personally I became aware of this as a very, very young age for me because I was always kind of choosing to rise above things. You know, I have a background of being bullied. I have a background of being rejected. I have a background of being abandoned. Like I have a lot of like painful social stuff in my background. And I work really hard, and not always really well, but really hard to try to be helpful rather than harmful. And if I am harmful, it's in like because of self-preservation. I'm trying to self-preserve, right? Which again, is sort of a natural human tendency that we can't fully help. You know, we do have the sense to self-preserve kind of over everything, which can be perceived as harmful. It's helpful to you. It might be harmful to someone else, right? So like for me, one of the things that I was really, really focusing on when I came into more awareness and more intentionality and all these things was speaking the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love. Being direct, being assertive, not necessarily being aggressive, which I do struggle with. I can't lie. I do have I do have a little chippy on my shoulder that even still kind of lives there that I try to like brush off. Because, you know, your words are a way you can be helpful or harmful. And so these tools that we have at our disposal, we can use for help or we can use for harm. Our actions, helpful and harmful, right? So I know for myself, if I'm not very careful and conscious with my words, I can be very harmful. I know that about myself. Like, it is too easy for me to cut somebody down to size with my words if I'm not being careful. My words, my tone, my volume, my articulation. Like, I know that about myself. So I work really, really diligently to not pop off at the mouth with things I shouldn't have said, you know, because I know these places where I can be more harmful than helpful because I'm hurt and hurting people hurt people, you know, perhaps, or whatever. So when we get to examining ourselves, there are also things we do for ourselves that are helpful and harmful, right? Like, we have a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors that are inherently harmful that we think are helpful, and they're not at all, you know? And so sometimes we kind of get into partnership with people or relationship with people, and if we self-reflect and we self-examine, it's like, yeah, why do I do that? That's not the best. That's not the best thing, you know, like, that's not great. Most people kind of chill in monster mode and they never actually examine themselves. They're never like, wait, why did I do that thing? Right. Now, I'll give you personal story time here. When you're sitting in a jail cell, in solitary confinement, when you were told you're not going to jail by the police, but you end up in jail, you don't have much of an option but to sit there and self-reflect. How did I get here? What the hell's going on? And I don't talk a lot about my experience in jail. It was as safe as anything could be. It felt very much like Daniel in the lion's den because I was in protective custody, essentially, because somehow I was a criminal of criminals in the criminal justice system. Don't ask, I don't know, but fine. So I had protected custody, so I was pretty safe in my 4-wall, 2-camera cell. But what they give you in jail is a box full of essentials, basically. And in that box, you have a toothbrush, a cup, 2 sheets, a blanket, 2 pamphlets, one which is how to brush your teeth. Well, this is what I was given anyway. And one on how not to get raped in jail. And then they do this nice thing where they give you your sheet of charges. And on that sheet of charges that I had was only one thing, and it was the 2C statute in New Jersey, which I'll never forget, intent to harm a minor by a caretaker. So I had to really, really, really wrestle with help and harm, because as a teacher and by my own moral code of self, I know my intention is always to be helpful. I never want to harm anything, and I know that about myself. But when you're in jail, knowing you're going to have to plead guilty to a crime that you're looking at that you fundamentally don't think is true and don't agree with, and there's no good way to prove, like, how do you prove you didn't intend to harm somebody? You know, how do you prove people pleasing? How do you prove that, like, my intent was to make him happy, not to harm him? Like, there's no good way to prove that when you're a 28-year-old and he's a 17-year-old. There's just not. So I had to really think about help and harm in a big way. And it was like, was my intent to harm him? And I'm like, no, like, my intent is never to harm anybody. Not really. And so thinking on that, really struggling with that when you're being painted as this villainous character, which I was and still am to some people, and like, hey, that's fine, you do you. I know I'm never intending to harm, like, but I really, like, really had to weigh this out. So now it layers everything all over the place where I'm like, hey, is this helpful or harmful? How is it? Why is it? Not can it be misconstrued, because everybody can misconstrue anything. But like, I'll take the time to be like, okay, is this a teachable moment, or is this a waste of my time and energy and attention and money? You know? And how I normally assess that is, can growth come from this? Or am I talking to like a brick wall? You know, and I now I have that ability to kind of discern and assess, but like, that's a lot of times, like when there are comments made or when there are things that are hurtful, you know, I will take the time and be like, all right, is this something I just ignore and delete? Or is this something I address because like someone can learn here? More often than not, it's an addressable moment because it can help grow, right? And so because even when people mean harm for me, I will always use it to try to be helpful to them. That's where I am. That's how I am. That's how I've always been, for the most part. And so, and that's always been something I've done. Like, I was hazed pretty relentlessly in high school. And when I became a junior and a senior, I never, ever hazed anybody. It's just not the way I do things, you know? We were hazed in college. I was in a sorority. I don't do that to people. So like, I've always been the kind of person that doesn't fucking do that. Like, I'm not the one. Life is too hard. I'm not trying to make it worse for anybody. I don't want to see anybody fail. I don't want to see anybody get hurt. I don't want to see anything. Like, it's just never been me. But don't think that when you're in a jail cell looking at this thing that says intent to harm, that you're not like, shit, am I a villain? Am I a harmful person? Was this really a harmful thing? How harmful was it? Like, did I mean to, you know, like you think. So I want you to think, not in a jail cell, not in the like ridiculously difficult way I had to, but in the very realistic sense of, you can do this with everything and anything. It could probably drive you crazy, so maybe don't, but like, pick a person or pick a thing to focus on where it's like, is this helpful or harmful, and why and how? When you do that, you start to show up differently in your life. When you do that, you begin to see things from other people's perspectives, from a higher perspective, right? Because that's the point of this channel anyway, is to come out of where you already view life and come up higher. Consider new alternatives, consider new perspectives. This is the point, because when you change your perspective, guess what? You change your awareness. When you can change your awareness, you can take different action, you can regulate differently, and then you'll change your life. And I'll tell you that right now, like, that's just literally, it could have been a very different experience if I decided, you know what? Which don't think I didn't wrestle with this, by the way. If they say I'm harmful, I'm gonna be harmful. Don't think that wasn't a thought. If I'm a villain, I'm gonna be a villain. If I'm a felon, I'm gonna be a criminal. Don't think that's not a thought, guys. Because like, of course it is. If enough people tell you enough things enough of the time, and you don't have a strong self-concept, or the ability to see your true self or know your true self, don't think for 1 second. But I'm strong-willed, so I know myself, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. But it's a thing, you know. So when you consider where you're helpful, where you're helping yourself, where you're making choices that help you, versus where you're harmful, where you're making decisions that are not helpful to you at all, and they're harming you actively, you know, it's easy to see, right? You're overspending, that's a harmful behavior. You're overeating, that's a harmful behavior. You're overindulging things you shouldn't be indulging, harmful behavior. And when I say shouldn't be indulging, I mean things that don't serve you to any level. They're not advancing you in your life. They're not advancing you in your career, you know? So help and harm is important because it's kind of like good and evil, I would say, or selfless versus selfish. You know, if I'm kind of breaking it down to brass tacks, that's kind of it. Like, harmful people are kind of inherently selfish, not necessarily evil, although people who are evil are extraordinarily selfish. But you can be selfish and not be evil. You can be selfish and be lost and confused. You know, there's a spectrum. I used to talk about this all the time when I was teaching. There's a scale, there's a spectrum of like selfless to selfish. And like the most selfless person we could probably think about, right? We got like Jesus, Mother Teresa, Gandhi. The most selfish people we could think about are like Satan, Hitler, you know, Mussolini. People who are, their will is so important, they will commit atrocities to make it happen. And the collective goodness is so important, they'll make sure they do whatever they can to help, right? It's like that. And then everybody falls in between on the spectrum. We all fall somewhere. So help and harm is super important to consider, super important to navigate. And I mean, if you want to sow good fruit and you want to reap a bountiful harvest, you want to try to be as helpful as possible, because when you help the world helps you. That's just the law of sowing and reaping. That's just the law of attraction. That's just how life works. Does that mean bad things don't happen? No, it doesn't mean that, but it means everything is always working toward your favor. And we talked about that the other day. I'm going a little over here, guys. So help and harm is one of those topics that I think about pretty regularly. So I hope this is helpful to you. And we're going to be moving into a new series very, very soon. So if you have any thoughts that you want to share, drop them below. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, get notified when I'm going to bring new things to you, and we'll grow the channel. Otherwise, I will see you guys on the next video.